What's going on YouTube? Listen up, young elder gang. This is Chief Whitebird at you with another banger. Please make sure you like, subscribe, and share this video, fam. I hope this video get at least 100,000 likes in this video. You will find history definitions, scripture information, and best of all, what we Americans have been deprived of from the beginning. The truth. Keep in mind, this content used in this video is intended for entertainment, educational, and informational purposes only. We will give you the total truth as we best understand it. Today, be sure to hit that like button. Young Elder Gang, hit that subscribe button if you're new to the channel. Hit that bell, and don't forget to check back with us every day for new content. This is gonna blow your mind. You remember Tombstone the movie? Bet you didn't know this. Wyatt Earp and Masterson weren't just lawmen, they were also buffalo hunters, fueling a massacre that changed America forever. Let's dig into the real Wild West. Wyatt Berry Stapp Earp, born on March 19, 1848, was an American lawman in the American West, including Dodge City, Wichita, and Tombstone. Masterson was born Bartholomew Masterson on November 27, 1853 in Canada, and later changed his name to William Barclay Masterson. Masterson and Wyatt Earp were both freemasons working for the U.S. government to wipe out the buffalo. In the late 1800s, Earp and Masterson, famous for taming towns, joined a booming business slaughtering buffalo by the thousands. They were killing Native American buffalo off for just the skin, and would leave the meat to rot. Earp and Masterson operated as commercial buffalo hunters, primarily focusing on killing buffalo for their hides. Hides meant big money, but every shot echoed across the plains, wiping out a keystone species and shattering the lives of Native Americans. The buffalo hide trade was booming at the time, fueled by demand for industrial leather in Europe and elsewhere. The widespread slaughter of buffalo, including by commercial hunters like Earp and Masterson, had a devastating impact on Native American tribes who relied on the buffalo for their survival and way of life. Buffalo were more than animals. They were the heart of the land, lifeblood for entire nations. When the U.S. military and buffalo soldiers joined in, the slaughter became a weapon to starve the tribes, breaking their spirit. By the 1880s, mountains of bones replaced herds that once numbered in the millions. The land, the people, and the animals, all connected, all devastated. When you hear about Wild West heroes, ask yourself, what stories do we choose to remember, and which do we erase? How do our choices ripple through land, life, and legacy? The extermination of the buffalo was also a deliberate policy of the U.S. government and military aimed at forcing Native Americans into starvation, like we said. The U.S. government, with support from the military, actively encouraged the hunting of buffalo as a means to control and subdue Native American populations by eliminating their primary food source. Therefore, Earp and Masterson participated in the buffalo hunting industry. They were contributing to a larger, complex process with both commercial and political motivations that resulted in the near extinction of the buffalo and had devastating consequences for Native Americans. The Buffalo Soldiers were the first so-called Black Army regiments in peacetime, established in 1866 after the Civil War. These soldiers played a significant role in the settlement of the western frontier and saw action in numerous conflicts, including the Indian Wars, Spanish-American War, and Philippine-American War. Their nickname, bestowed upon them by Native American tribes, has become synonymous with colonizers, genocide, and hate. Congress created 6 all-black. Most were African Moors who had took the deal with USA Corporation cavalry and infantry regiments, later consolidated into 4, in 1866. Their primary duty was to support the westward expansion, killing off the natives, protect colonizers, and build infrastructure, forts, often working alongside free white colonizers. They saw active service in the Indian Wars, including the Red River War. Buffalo Soldiers also served as the first rangers in national parks like Yosemite and Sequoia before the National Park Service was established. While serving with distinction, the Buffalo Soldiers faced significant discrimination and segregation within the military while helping the colonizers to conquer the natives. Their service and sacrifices to help the colonizers steal the natives' land have inspired generations of colonizers, and their story continues to be celebrated amongst them and recognized highly by those who they helped steal the native land. The Buffalo Soldiers, who were mostly Moorish African soldiers in the U.S. Army, were deployed to the West and involved in conflicts with Native American tribes. They were primarily focused on killing buffalo for the USA Corporation, which was secretly their overall mission. They killed millions of buffalo for the U.S. Corporation to starve the Native Americans out. The U.S. Corporation employed a strategy of decimating the buffalo population to reduce the food supply of Native Americans. And Buffalo Soldiers played part of that effort. It was their main focus. A major factor in the conflict between the U.S. Army and Native Americans was the decimation of the buffalo population, a crucial food source for many tribes. The Army, under commanders like Sherman and Sheridan, actively encouraged the killing of buffalo. They were trained cowboys. They killed most of the buffalo off and herded what was left, locking them on farms owned by the U.S. government. Most of these became your Army bases today. This is how the Buffalo Soldiers became your first rangers in national parks. Buffalo Soldiers would use the buffalo as target practice, and the Army's goal was to deny Native Americans access to buffalo for their own use. They were primarily engaged in maintaining order and fighting in conflicts with Native Americans for the colonizers. The Comanche Native American War Tribe, which the U.S. government considered to be the most dangerous tribe on Turtle Island, fought countless battles against the Buffalo Soldiers and the colonizers to protect the buffalo. In summary, the Buffalo Soldiers were involved in the efforts to reduce the buffalo population. It was their primary role, and it was a wider military strategy to weaken Native American tribes by starving them out. Before free white colonizers began to push into the vast West in large numbers, an estimated 50 to 60 million buffalo freely roamed the Great Plains. Native Americans hunted them for food and other necessities, and a harmonious ebb and flow between man and beast prevailed. However, after the Civil War, that would change as more and more people moved westward. As a result, new Army posts were established. And to supply those many soldiers, the Army contracted with local men to supply buffalo meat to feed the troops. At about the same time, the Iron Horse began to blaze a trail into the West, and these construction men had to be fed. Adding to the need for food, people back east demanded buffalo robes used as coats and lap robes when riding in sleighs and carriages. These events put many a man to work as buffalo hunters. Leavenworth, Kansas, became a trading center for the buffalo hides, and tanneries found even more uses for the material, such as making drive belts for industrial machines and grinding buffalo bones into fertilizer. In some places, buffalo tongues became a delicacy in fine restaurants. Soon, the demand for buffalo increased so much that year-round work became available for buffalo hunters. This, all occurring when the economy was depressed after the Civil War, led many a tough man to earn his living as a buffalo hunter. Armed with powerful, long-range rifles, individual hunters could kill as many as 250 buffalo daily. This really is still going on in a way. They still have hunting seasons for sport. Tanneries paid as much as $3 per hide and 25 cents for each tongue, which made a nice living for hundreds of colonizers, including Wyatt Earp, Bat Masterson, Pat Garrett, Wild Bill Hickok, and William F. Cody, to name a few. Unfortunately, once these hides and tongues were taken from the carcasses, the edible buffalo meat was often left to rot on the plains. By the 1880s, over 5,000 hunters and skinners were involved in the trade. The Indians watched in dismay as buffalo hunting took on an almost carnival atmosphere when railroads began advertising hunting by rail. They called it the buffalo train. This occurred when trains sometimes encountered large herds of buffalo crossing the tracks. Seeing a way to capitalize on the problem, the advertising flooded the newspapers, and in no time, sporting men with rifles were shooting buffalo by the hundreds just for fun. Those animals shot from the train were simply left where they died. As the slaughter continued, the Indians became increasingly angry and resentful as they watched their primary source of sustenance dwindle at the hands of the so-called free white man. This led to more and more Indian attacks, which resulted in U.S. Army retaliation at the height of the Indian Wars. At this time, the U.S. government desired to separate the Indians from the rest of civilization by reclassifying them as blacks, Negroes, and colored, then replace them with impostors. The U.S. government wanted complete control over the native buffalo. To do this, the U.S. Army aggressively pursued a policy to eradicate the buffalo, intentionally extinguishing the Indian sustenance, which would force them to surrender to the U.S. government's will, although some tribes would rather starve. They wanted to kill off a buffalo population for various reasons, including the buffalo occupying valuable land that the USA wants for their own purposes, such as agriculture, colonization, or resource extraction. The buffalo are culturally or socially important to a specific group. Their eradication could be a way to weaken or control that group, as was done historically to Native Americans who depended on buffalo for their survival and way of life. The buffalo valuable for scientific research or experimentation, leading to their elimination for these purposes. Similar to historical examples of hunting for sport, some colonizers wanted to eliminate the buffalo for the thrill of the hunt or for display. USA Corporation wanted to kill off the buffalo population to starve Native Americans for a combination of reasons, including forcing Native Americans into complete submission. The buffalo were a vital resource for Plains tribes, providing food, clothing, tools, and shelter. By eliminating their primary means of survival, this forced Native Americans to rely on government resources and policies, making them more amenable to control and confinement, undermining resistance to territorial expansion. The ability of Native Americans to sustain themselves through buffalo hunting enabled them to resist the encroachment of colonizers and the expansion of the United States. By destroying the buffalo, this resistance could be weakened or eliminated, applying a scorched earth strategy. Similar to a military tactic aiming to deny an enemy access to crucial resources, eliminating the buffalo would remove a key element necessary for the survival of the Plains tribes, forcing them to surrender. Promoting a particular vision of colonization and resource use, the elimination of the buffalo would open up land for other uses, such as cattle ranching and agriculture, aligning with the interests of colonizers seeking to establish their own livelihoods on the plains, eliminating perceived obstacles. Some within the U.S. government viewed the buffalo and the Native Americans who relied on them as obstacles to westward expansion and national progress, making the destruction of the buffalo a strategic objective. In summary, involved the killing of buffalo for a combination of reasons, such as control over resources, weakening the Native Americans, exploiting unique biological traits, and reshaping the ecosystem for specific purposes. When the Texas Legislature was discussing a bill to protect the buffalo, General Philip Sheridan defended the buffalo hunters and opposed the bill by saying, "These men have done more in the last 2 years and will do more in the next year to settle the vexed Indian question than the entire regular army has done in the last 40 years. They are destroying the Indians' commissary, and it is a well-known fact that an army losing its base of supplies is placed at a great disadvantage. Send them powder and lead, if you will, but for lasting peace, let them kill, skin, and sell until the buffaloes are exterminated. Then your prairies can be covered with speckled cattle." By 1884, the great era of the buffalo had ended, and nothing remained of the massive buffalo herds but piles of bones. At that time, only 2,000 surviving buffalo were left in the United States. Fortunately, early conservation efforts led to establishing the world's first national park, Yellowstone, in 1872. There, a small buffalo herd was preserved, but still, what few that were left outside of the park were being killed on federal land. So, in 1894, the Lacey Act was signed into law, prohibiting the killing of any wildlife in federal preserves. The buffalo were saved from extinction, and today it is estimated that there are over 150,000 bison on public preserves and in private hands. We are living through a period of unprecedented species extinction due to human-induced changes to the planet's ecosystems. This is not the first time human activities radically changed relationships between land and life. Illustrated by a famous photograph of remains, the extermination of bison from the North American West in the 19th century is one key example of catastrophic species loss. As a visual studies researcher, I use photographs to analyze the impacts of colonization on human and non-human lives. Images of bison bones provide a window into the cultural and ecological relations that tie animal and human lives together. Through photographs, we can also think about bison extermination as part of a history of relationships. The most famous photograph of bison extermination is a grisly image of a mountain of bison skulls. It was taken outside of Michigan Carbon Works in Rougeville, Michigan in 1892. At the close of the 18th century, there were between 30 and 60 million bison on the continent. By the time of this photograph, that population was reduced to only 456 wild bison. Increased colonization of the West led to the large-scale slaughter of bison. The arrival of white settler hunters with their weapons, as well as growing market demand for hides and bones, intensified the killing. Most herds were exterminated between 1850 and the late 1870s. The photograph shows the massive scale of this destruction. A man-made mountain emerging from the image's grassy foreground, the pile of bones as appears part of the landscape. The image can be read as an example of what Canadian photographer Edward Burtynsky has called manufactured landscapes. What was taken from prairie land to make this manufactured landscape in Michigan? The Rougeville photograph is often used to illustrate the scale of bison extermination. It appears in conservation publications, magazines, films, and recent protest memes. The photograph has become an icon of this animal's slaughter. But this photograph is more than just a symbol of human-caused destruction and hubris. Analyzing the image with multiple lenses illustrates a history of relationships. The Mound of Skulls also indicates the abundance of bison life. But what was life on the prairies like before bison extermination? What relationships did bison have before their deaths? We know that indigenous nations and bison herds were closely linked. The vast number of bison herds shaped the lives of indigenous nations by facilitating the formations of large, politically and socially complex communities across the prairies. Many indigenous scholars demonstrate the interrelation of plains indigenous nations and bison herds, sometimes referred to as buffalo. For example, Cree political scientist Kira Ladner studied the non-hierarchical organization of Blackfoot communities and practices of collaborative decision-making. These community practices are rooted in close relationships to bison herds, which work as non-coercive collectives in which no single animal dominates. Similarly, the Buffalo Treaty, an indigenous-led effort to reintroduce wild bison first signed in 2014, describes the buffalo as a relative of plains indigenous peoples. The treaty states, "Buffalo is part of us, and we are part of buffalo culturally, materially, and spiritually." Cree scholar and filmmaker Tasha Hubbard has documented stories about bison extermination from many plains indigenous nations. These stories mourn the trauma of losing bison, a non-human community many indigenous nations see as relations. Extermination radically undermined possibilities of life for indigenous and bison communities. Hubbard argues that bison extermination was a form of genocide. Through the lens of interrelationship, the photograph takes on additional meaning. As Dakota scholar Chief Kim Tall Bear reminds us, indigenous peoples have never forgotten that non-humans are agential beings engaged in social relations that profoundly shape human lives. The pile of skulls is not only symbolic of the destruction of an ecosystem, it is also a symbol of the loss of relations. Bison made the prairies hospitable for many other communities. Each skull represents one 600-kilogram animal. Bison are the largest land mammals in North America. Bison are not just massive in size, they are also a keystone species in the West, meaning they have a dramatic influence on an ecosystem. If one of these species disappears, no other species can fill its ecological role, and the whole ecosystem changes as a result. The skulls in the photograph do not just represent the loss of bison, but the disruption of an entire ecosystem. Each bison killed meant the end of grazing, wallowing, and migrating practices that make the land hospitable for other species. For example, hundreds of species of insects live in bison dung, providing food for birds, turtles, and bats. When bison roll in dirt, they create depressions called wallows, which fill with spring rain and provide homes for tadpoles and frogs. Without the presence of bison, habitats and food for these and many other species disappear. The bison skulls are not alone in the photograph. Two men in suits pose proudly with the skulls. Their presence signifies another aspect of human-animal relationships, commodity or market relations. Each skull was collected from across the prairies and shipped east by train or steamship. Once they arrived at facilities like Michigan Carbon Works, bison bones were rendered as fertilizer, glue, and ash. The bones produced commodities, like bone china, which were sold in European and North American cities. Crates, like the large one in the foreground of the image, were technologies of colonial capitalism, moving bones from prairies to factories and then finished products to market. The photograph also represents the network of infrastructures that colonizer agents imposed across North America. Colonizer infrastructure, from railways and roads to factories and markets, radically intensified the transformation of animals into commodities. The extractive industries of colonial capitalism devastated habitat and biodiversity, as well as relationships between bison, other plant and animal species, and indigenous nations. Similar industries are driving the large-scale extinctions happening today and predicted to continue in the near future. There are currently 31,000 wild bison living in conservation herds in North America. The species is considered near threatened on the International Union for Conservation of Nature Red List. This indicates that conservation efforts have improved chances for bison species survival, but protections are still needed. These remaining animals are the descendants of those few hundred bison who survived the 19th century extermination. With the help of conservation projects, including the indigenous-led Buffalo Treaty and Intertribal Buffalo Council, bison continue to survive. As a close reading of the Rougeville photograph from multiple perspectives demonstrates that the scale of bison loss is dramatic. Relationships on the prairies were forever changed by the extermination of the species in its wild, free-ranging form.